What's up, everyone? Happy Friday, and welcome to the game on Pax8 Live, the show where we talk about all the cybersecurity shenanigans you need to be aware of. We have a really exciting and also really important show today. We're going to be talking about the federal landscape, what's happening with CMMC, how that's going to impact you as a service provider, and how you can get involved. Before we do that, let me do the typical housekeeping. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that fun stuff. You can now catch us on LinkedIn and YouTube, so wherever you're at, we'll come to you. Don't forget to sign up to Pax8 Beyond, and let's jump into the news.
Man, Dom, it's great to see you. The Canadians gave me
happening?
Official Canadian citizenship. I don't know if you heard about this, or at least unofficial, by winning a trivia contest in Canada. It's interesting how that works.
That's all it takes?
That's all it took. Yeah, they were very, very welcoming, eh? But no,
Did they
I
issue
am
you
back
a
stateside.
credit error token for that, or?
Yes. No, I wish they issued me a decentralized identification token that I could use to prove my identity. That would be amazing and avant-garde. But no, I am back stateside now, and I'm at GERCON. And I'm super excited about today's conversation in general, not just because I have some complete rock stars on the thing with us, but just in general, it's a hard topic and it needs to be addressed, and it's things that are really going to matter to MSPs. So I'm glad if you're here. Please comment. Definitely say something and let us know if you have questions. We've got the brilliant people on to answer it, so let's do that. But before that, we got tons of news, and we probably ought to jump right into it. So let's go ahead and go to the first one. I was going to play a Ray Charles song, but instead I'll just say it. Here we go again, right? Because apparently we're not allowed to do that. It's okay, no licensure on that. But Progress Software is the maker of MoveIt, right? We just saw the massive MoveIt vulnerabilities. You, me, and Mackenzie Brown were on, and we said, this isn't the end of it. A company that's going to make that code, a company that's going to have those problems, it's going to be that endemic, it's going to have more of them. And here we find ourselves, right, with WSFTP being vulnerable. So we're seeing similar challenges out of this that were going on in this one. And it says Progress warns of a new attack, right? Out of all WSFTP server flaws patched this week, 2 of them were rated as critical, with one tracked as CVE 2023-40-004. And if you think about it, we're in like the 50,000. So this is a fairly recently filed one. A second one then filed just another 2,000 or so later. The other critical bug, CVE 2023-42-657, is a directory traversal vulnerability. So now we have this .NET deserialization and a directory traversal vulnerability, which means now I can use that to move up and down and look at other things in the directory of the path where I land. Attackers could also escape the context of WSFTP server file structure and perform the same level of operations, delete, rename, remove directory, make directory, on file and folder locations on the underlying operating system. So these ratings for those vulnerabilities coming together mean that you can actually traverse the operating system's directory path and use it. And so, data compromise for sure. So what are your thoughts on this one, Dom? I mean, were you surprised by us seeing this come out?
It's so bad. I'm not surprised. I'm a little sad because we're still dealing with MoveIt report after MoveIt report after MoveIt
21,000 they said in the article.
Yeah, and they're all big. 100,000 people, 500,000 people, 1 million people, 3 million people. I'm convinced that everyone is in a MoveIt database store somewhere.
Probably.
And WSFTP is pretty big in the I need to transfer files like it's 1998 space. It's still a big thing. So I'm sorry, FTP is out of date. Stop using it. But this is bad. And if you think about it, first of all, that first vulnerability is a perfect 10. You don't see a lot of perfect 10 CVEs.
There are not many.
You see a lot of 9.8s, but not 10s. So that's rough. But that directory transversal ability to drop data is massive, right? Imagine just dropping stuff in the startup folder. So you could exfil data, drop ransomware in the startup folder, all out of the FTP
or the WW pub, right? Like if that has access to an internet site,
web shells.
I would dump a poison payload for me to use and poison others in a drive-by download, or to use as a web shell. I mean, there's just so many different things that you can do because of that ability to read, write, make directories and delete directories with that. And to your point of being able to do a 10.0
do not expose FTP to the WAN. Like, there's better options, right? There's SFTP, which is probably the best out of the legacy file transfer options, because you can use keys. So don't use FTP. I realize there's
which is not the same as FTPS.
VPN it, tunnel it. It is not. It is not. No, FTPS is file transfer protocol over TLS. So I'll take my acronym for that. And
that's fair.
SFTP
or transport layer
secure share
I'll take
file
his other
transfer
acronym.
protocol. Oh, you get the other acronym.
I,
So different
anyways, I
kinds of
digress.
encryptions, ability to use keys, ability to add a lot more security. But if you can
Yeah.
avoid it, don't expose these things to the LAN. Just don't. They're not. I don't think they're built for that. Put them in VPNs. Find ways to do it. Not
Yeah.
FTP. We beat that one
100%.
up
Let's
enough.
move
What's
on.
next? Oh, and patch. Don't forget
Okay.
to
Yeah.
patch. Please patch your
Yeah.
WSFTP
Please patch. If you have progress software at all, patch right now for sure on WSFTP.
or delete it.
So Johnson Controls also got hit. We saw this come out yesterday. Johnson Controls is confirmed being hit by disruptive cyber attack with a ransomware group claiming to have stolen 27 terabytes of information from the company. An 8K form filed by the company with the SEC, right, which is telling them, hey, we had a compromise, that says some of their internal IT infrastructure and applications were disrupted as a result of a cyber incident. And you know what that means, right? That's ransomware at that point. An investigation has been launched to determine what type of information may have been compromised. They quote, to date, many of the company's applications are largely unaffected and remain operational. To the extent possible and in line with its business continuity plans, the company implemented workarounds for certain operations to mitigate disruptions and continue servicing its customers. However, the incident has caused and is expected to continue to cause disruption to parts of the company's business operations, Johnson Controls said in the SEC. And I want to call this out for a couple of reasons, because number one is it is talking about the fact that they did file a form to tell about this incident. And with the new SEC regulations and guidance on incident reporting, what they're really trying to do is say to their shareholders, this is the impact. You need to brace for it, right? This is now two shareholders saying, hey, we might have operations impacted. So we have this as kind of at least a sign of the future of where we're all heading, in the sense that we're going to have to be able to be aware of what that is. What is our BCP, right? Our business continuity plan, sorry. What is our BCP? How are we going to implement that? What part of our business suffers? When does it suffer the most? When can I not return back to operations? When we were at Iconic, one of the things we did is we were so deeply SSO'd into everything that we were afraid at some point that we might, let's just say, have a Microsoft SSO outage. It never happened.
That never happened.
But let's say it were to happen. If it were to happen, we had timelines where we're like, listen, we'll carve this out with a break glass account after 2 days, or this one after 5 weeks, or this after, right? And so they are at least having transparency about having a BCP or business continuity plan, and that they are actually implementing that. And we're starting to see more transparency about this. So what are your thoughts on it? I mean, 27 terabytes of data, goodness gracious.
That's a lot of data. And part of me is thinking, how does one move 27 terabytes of data?
Without being
Allegedly,
noticed.
at the highest speed you could possibly move 27 terabytes of data because you're trying to be quick. So you're probably saturating some networks. And nobody thinks to be like, hey, guys, who's copying all this data? What is going on? So that's point number one. Point number two is Johnson Controls makes a lot of industrial equipment, or interfaces with a lot of industrial equipment, I should say. So a lot of SCADA type, and I genuinely don't know that acronym. I just know it is SCADA.
I'll look it up.
Control things with IP addresses. A lot of interfaces that historically security was a last thought. And they're probably integrated into a lot of critical infrastructure products. But as we saw in the article, they're also in your smart home. So depending on what data is in there, if it's IP around the underlying security or authentication mechanisms or networking mechanisms of these products, this could be one of those that has a lot of follow-on impact.
It stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. And what's interesting about SCADA networks or in control networks in general is you're often seeing the application of a control network and control plane down to operational logic of some sort, right? Whether that be programmable logic, whether that be other different methodologies of delivering that. And so what's really interesting about it is them getting hit and the information taken about those devices will undoubtedly bring information about the way they've deployed things, about the way those things have access, and it's going to be a very valuable asset, at least from an operational perspective, right? I mean, you think about what we're talking about when it comes to OT. Now we're not just talking about IT or information technology. We're talking about operational technology or OT, which CISO
you really
is very
get an
heavily
acronym for
understanding.
IT. That seems like a cheat.
Seems okay. It's low hanging fruit, but you played duck hunt and you shot at the little bird that was down and easy to hit too. So don't miss your acronyms on that one. All right. So, but the point is that when you think about what OT means, it means it can move stuff, right? Sam that came and visited us from CISA said, what do you think of OT as things that can move things in the physical world? Well, if they can move things in the physical world, they can destroy things in the physical world. They can cause problems. In fact, we've already seen cyber attacks that have attempted to blow up a Saudi oil plant, right? We've seen cyber attacks that attempted to mess with the OT side of it and control system set to then destroy something from the actual human physical world. And, one of the things Jason Slagle and I brought up, hey, there's Jason right there on my chat. But one of the things Jason Slagle and I brought up is he was talking about a massive, smelt or a giant furnace that's controlled by some ladder logic. And that ladder logic was dependent on some sensors that came from a machine that was running an ancient Windows version that had tons of vulnerabilities. And now in our case, think about if that was Johnson Controls having an asset or something that's now been available, or passwords or things that are sensitive, you could see them turning up the furnace by saying, no, it's not getting hot enough. Add more add more power. And what happens when that blows up, right? We start getting into these understandings that IT isn't as separated from the OT world as we like to think. And Johnson Controls,
it's not new, by the way. This has been successful. This is,
sure.
We've when the aliens wrote malware and put it into a centrifuge in Iran, right? It literally destroyed everything in there. So
did you say the aliens?
This is a real. Yeah, the aliens obviously did it. I mean, no one else took it.
Oh, it wasn't the U.S. I see what you did there. I'm with you now.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. You're talking about Stuxnet and Flame. Yeah, we didn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah, we didn't do that.
I digress.
And it destroyed everything in there. So these are very, very real attacks, right? They can cause very real damage or harm to people and living things.
We've got one or two more to go through, so we'll keep moving on. We don't want to take away from our awesome special guests. So the next thing we saw was a great Huntress article talking about this vulnerability, but the WebP heap buffer overflow, it's another one of these very, very high, very somewhat, I guess, easy to execute type CVEs. The Huntress team is currently investigating CVE 2023-4863, a heap buffer overflow in WebP image encoding in codec and libwebp. Threat actors are exploiting this critical vulnerability in WoW, which affects anything using libwebp library version prior 1.3.2. What's interesting about this one, I'll go ahead and say what's happening. WebP is a common image format that supports lossless and lossy compression for web-based images. It is similar to the JPG, PNG, SVG formats and is natively supported by most common web browsers, so Google Chrome, Safari, Firefox, and Edge. The attack is accomplished by presenting a crafted WebP lossless file to a software using WebP that triggers an out-of-bands write. It allows you to then start doing bad things, right? Lead to denial of service or even write in your own remote code execution to execute in that line. Huntress confirms that our products are not affected, sure. But they did research to take that the proof of concept outlined in the write-up by Ben Hawks and triggered the buffer overflow in a lab setting. So they are able to actually replicate it by the POC, which means if you're not familiar, typically you'll have some vulnerability come out, but it won't automatically have a proof of concept code that I can go use. Now, it's pretty quick. It usually happens very quickly.
Right.
But what Huntress did was tested that. And Jason in his digging, and Jason Slagle's digging, he's saying, one of the things about MoveIt is I could just find a DLL file and go hunt for it. I can see if that DLL that's compromised by hash, by name, whatever it may be, is bad. But in this vulnerability, things are kind of baked in. It's actually into and built into the software. And so right now it is actually going to be harder for us to know what's vulnerable, what's not. That also means that it's probably harder to weaponize, right? In the sense that you won't always know exactly what code's going to be, susceptible to that.
But you know what this reminds us of? Log4Shell. Because Log4Shell was a component far deep inside your Java application, right? And these WebP libraries are far deep inside of Chromium, but far more widespread, right? But this is very difficult to find. It's going to be relying on every single software company that processes WebP images to go look at every single library they use that processes WebP images and figure out which versions have said version of. It's going to take a while to remediate this one. I mean, the majors have done it, by the way, patch your stuff, but there's going to be so many little tiny things that are they're going to be vulnerable for a while.
Well, real quick, Brad Gross said, and the hackers are only asking for 51 million in reference to Johnson Controls. What a bargain. He's right. There's certainly more impact than that, only 51 million. Jason said hi. And then Brian Wheeler said the JC or Johnson Controls hit will be interesting for future firmware poisoning of IT and OT systems. These systems are the next botnet. Dude, you're singing to my soul right now. You're 100% right. It's my fears. Okay, last one. We have ALPHV raising their head again with 6 terabytes, and they actually beat their chest and said, McLaren Healthcare, this is the largest healthcare breach by ALPHV. Like, they actually were posting about it. ALPHV posted, Ransomware Gang posted about hacking the Michigan-based McLaren Health, which I actually am near right now. It's in this area, calling it the largest healthcare data breach. The threat actors have threatened to release the stolen data if ransom payment is denied. What's interesting about this, and we're way over time, so I won't beat this to death, but it's another one. ALPHV is believed to be an English-speaking ransomware group. They are absolutely fluent in their social engineering techniques. They seem to be winning very, very easily. They go on to say, McLaren hospital attack caused a network of 15 hospitals and 2 HMOs in September 5th of 2023 when this happened. The IT outage affecting the Michigan systems caused delays in billing and electronic health records. You get into some other things, right? Health systems had to be shut down to find activities. Employees stated the McLaren outage led employees to use their personal cell phones to exchange messages during the shutdown. You think about the implications of these critical systems being down, but hospitals being down means people may die. And you get into a world where, depending on how large that hospital system is, you may take out an entire regional hospital system. You may be taking the most vulnerable patients and taking them out of the ability to deliver care. And we're starting to get into this place where, we all know we're not all ready for this, right? But we all need to be better, which is, after we get done with Robin Harris's awesome kickoff for Cybersecurity Month, the whole reason I wanted to bring these two amazing human beings on this show to have a conversation. So we beat the news to death. We'll see you after Robin Harris here in just a minute.
October is a very, very special month. We not only get Halloween, yay, we get Cybersecurity Month, a whole month to focus on something I hope we're focusing on the whole year. So this is a time when we get to kind of reiterate and re-emphasize our commitments, remind our employees, remind our customers, remind our families about the importance of security. And Pax8, the type of company we are, we like to do things with some style. And we like to make it more inviting. And so we're going to treat this like it's a big event, and we're going to have all kinds of things for people to participate in. We've already been shooting videos. We're planning all kinds of events to help really elevate the concept of security within our culture. And it's gonna be fun. I know security is not what you normally associate with fun, I get that. But we're gonna make it a little fun. And then I'm gonna invite you to put some thought into, how do we engage our employees? How do we support our customers? How do we get our family on board to kind of level up this month, and then let that flow out through the rest of the year? It's an opportunity. And, we take it like it's just this month, but we know we have to be security conscious 12 months, 365 days, 24 hours a day. We have to be on the job 24/7. But just let this month be an opportunity to just kind of push the bar a little bit and to explore some new opportunities and new ways of making sure everybody is keeping security top of mind as they do their operational functions. Enjoy the month, and stay safe and stay secure.
I do love the
Cyber
call to
Month.
action
It's coming.
from Robin about Cyber Month, right? And she looks so happy, and so you better go skill up, right? I'm afraid of Robin in a lot of ways. She's almost too happy, I think, about Cyber Month. But no, she makes a great call to action. We are at Pax8 going to be kicking off our Cyber Month by doing a capture the flag. And we are going to be doing a whole company-wide CTF inside Pax8. And for all of our aiders that are watching that pay attention, we're going to be maybe releasing some things you might need right here on this show. You never know. But I would not miss an episode of the game this month coming up. So, Dom, we've got some awesome guests. I actually will tell, and I've had her on various things that we've done before, but Joy was the first person I ever took a cybersecurity class from, at least in some formality. And so I am very happy to have Joy back on. And Scott are going to join us to talk about a really cool thing they're doing for MSPs in their coalition they've put together. So let's go ahead and have them join us, and we'll get started. All right.
Hi there.
Welcome to the show, Joy and Scott.
Thank you.
It's awesome to have you all here.
Thank
So
you.
let's get
you
us
for
started. We've got tons of comments in YouTube. Sorry about that. We've got tons of comments in YouTube. We've got LinkedIn going as well. So please keep your questions coming. Please pop them in for us. But I'd love for the two of you to just take one by one. We'll start with you, Joy. Introduce yourself. tell me about your background and what you work on, and then we'll do the same with you, Scott, if that's all right.
You bet. Thank you so much for having us. It's always great to see you, Matt and Dom. So Joy Beland, I think a lot of you have known me for many years. I had my own MSP based out of Los Angeles for 21 years. I sold that practice in 2018, and I went over to Continuum, which is where Matt referred to the cybersecurity fundamentals workshop that I put together. That was an absolute blast. I worked in that capacity at Continuum putting together that training program, and we were ingested into ConnectWise, where the audience grew even larger. It was a really great experience. I think that we trained 3,000 MSPs on cybersecurity fundamentals in that initiative. So I'm really grateful for having had that opportunity. And it really supported my entrance into the CMMC world very well, because when I went into Edwards Performance Solutions in 2020, it was right at that point where CMMC in its initial format was just transitioning to CMMC 2.0, and I was heading up the CMMC training program. I became a provisional assessor and a provisional instructor, created the 5-day cybersecurity boot camp for certified CMMC professionals, and really loved working in that position. I came over to Summit 7 about 14 months ago. One of the most attractive things about Summit 7 is the mission that we have. The older I get, the more I learn about cybersecurity, the more that I hear introductions like we just listened to for your show, Matt, the more imperative it is that we do something on a larger scale. MSPs can affect and impact small businesses and our nation's economy to a much greater extent than I think we give ourselves credit for. And the mission that Scott has with the leadership team at Summit 7 is something that I wholeheartedly have embraced and really look forward to continuing to support in any way that I can.
Awesome. Joy, it's great to have you here. I mean, that workshop was so pivotal for me. And the reason was, and I'll say this to any MSP that's out there watching right now, I went in that thinking that I had security figured out. I genuinely felt arrogant stepping into that of, man, I've got this. I've got antivirus. I'm taking care of it. We've got passwords rotated. It's awesome. We're great. I walked out of it going, okay, kill me now. I think it's time to be a bus driver. Like, I genuinely walked out of that going, there's no way I can do all of this. And as I look back now, it was, of course, doable. And there were things, but it does take a certain standard. And I think, Joy, you've been an educator in this space for long enough that that standard isn't here. And I think that in general is part of some of the challenge. I just gave a talk with Jason, who's out in the audience, called MSPs Suck, but the world without them is worse. And the whole advocation, the end slide of this was a picture of an unlocked laptop from one of the enterprise executives from a major antivirus company, unlocked here at GurCon. And the slide was titled, "And You Suck Too." And at the end of the day, the ask was for a humble understanding that we all have to be better, that we all have to raise our own education inside companies, inside MSPs, inside SMBs, inside enterprise. And so one of the things I'd like to thank you for is you really kicked me down that path and that understanding. And we're all going down that journey. And I think that, Dom, you kind of went through your own version of that. And I think we kind of all have. So Scott, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and then we'll get into the spirit of the coalition and what we're doing here.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much. It's great to be here, being on your show for the first time. So my background, I was military, was in the Army, Signal Corps.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, absolutely. I got more from it than they got from me, for sure. So I got out of the Army, ended up going to work for NASA for about 6 or 7 years in the NASA data center, worked there for 6 or 7 years, and ultimately left NASA after I got my master's degree in information security, and went to work started Summit 7. And so started Summit 7 about 15 years ago with a business partner. And we transitioned in about 2016 heavily into the defense industrial base. It was an underserved community. There was no community serving the defense industrial base as a vertical market. And so we decided that, it was a need to bring security and compliance, capabilities to that market because of things like the new DFAR 7012 clause that required implementation to NIST 80171. Many of us are very familiar with that now. So we started working in that market back in 2016. And as we've seen that market, change and morph over the last 5, 6, 7 years, it has just gotten more and more in depth. You continue to peel back the onion, if you will, and see all the different layers of the security or lack of security in the defense industrial base. And it is a huge challenge for us to really secure this critical infrastructure sector that we have in the defense industrial base. We are being attacked daily by China, by Russia, by other threat actors. They are ransomwaring. They are stealing data. You guys just talked about Johnson Controls. Johnson Controls is active in every single critical infrastructure sector in the United States, all 16. Johnson Controls is in there. And so now if they've got 28 terabytes or however many terabytes of data it was, if they've got designs, plans, diagrams of systems, now they've got more information to be able to attack our industrial systems with. And it's a huge challenge. And so we've got to secure these platforms. And so that's really what Summit 7's mission is to really secure the defense industrial base, first, and then spread out to other critical infrastructure sectors and make sure that we are securing national security of the United States. And so that is really what led us into creating earlier this year what we're calling MSPs for the protection of critical infrastructure. And so I'm the executive director for that. Myself, Summit 7, along with two partners, Neo Systems and Qzara, who are MSPs and MSSPs in the defense industrial base community, came together to create this organization. Really what we're trying to do is really bring together MSPs and MSSPs that are focused on the DIB on critical infrastructure sectors into a single collective where we can work together and then bring our resources together to lobby and to educate. Our mission is really to educate Congress, to educate DoD and other federal agencies, to educate the Cyber AB, to educate state legislatures around all of these topics relating to security and MSPs and MSSPs. Because with how critical we are and the level of reach that we have into small and medium businesses as MSPs and MSSPs around the country, we are a huge risk. And so we have to be properly secured ourselves so that we can hope to secure our customers. And believe it, one way or the other, we are going to get regulated because we are such a risk point. And so if we're going to be regulated, we need to have a hand, we need to have a voice, we need to have some inputs into what that's going to look like. And that's really what MSPs for the protection of critical infrastructure is all about. So
what's interesting?
Go ahead. Sorry.
What's interesting, Scott, is you talk about mission. You said this, 3, 4, 5 times. I know that comes from the military background, but I'm on a mission, right? When I had my ransomware event in 2019, and I got to see the devastation that created, and I started to think in the way that I do that the scale of this means it could be extremely large, because if this can happen here and be this devastating, this can happen a lot and be very, very, very devastating. And at that same time, I was in Wichita, Kansas. I was working with a lot of people that served as subs underneath the primes that served most of your DIB. They were making parts. They were starting to find 80171. And I literally had people sit there, Scott, and say, Matt, how long can I lie about 80171? That was a real question asked me by a real big executive in a $100 million factory. How can I lie? I don't want to put in that pesky MFA. I don't have to change how I'm doing my manufacturing and how I hold the parts and the designs and the things that I do. I don't want to deal with it. Can I just lie? And they did lie, didn't they, Scott? They all lied for a long time until the interim ruling. I've heard stories like that, and to be honest, I've heard people say stuff like that, but I really try hard not to denigrate, our small medium business DIB clients out there and DIB customers, because, in many ways they've been put in a very, very difficult position. For decades and decades, the federal government has paid them as little as possible, has driven their rates down, has driven their profit margins down to single digits. They simply don't have the resources to implement. They are below what we all colloquially call the cybersecurity poverty line.
They're
Yeah,
there,
100%.
right? And so, so many of them are just trying to stay in business. And so, I try not to throw shade at them too much, but at the end of the day, we do have to secure this infrastructure. And that's another reason why, we created this, is because we want to lobby Congress to basically, provide appropriations. We believe that we could secure the DIB for probably around $50 billion. If the Congress would make an appropriation that could be provided as grants to small and medium businesses in the defense industrial base of $50 billion and control that program, I believe that we can secure the DIB without having to put small, medium businesses out of business. Because make no mistake, small, medium businesses are going to go out of business. Small manufacturers are going to go out of business as part of this.
True story.
There's going to be DIB contraction. There's no way around that. And so what we're trying to do is secure the infrastructure while not putting people out of business. That's really, really critical.
Joy, this brings us to an interesting and wider point a little bit, in the sense of, MSPs serve those SMBs, and they themselves have gaps in their capabilities, gaps in their knowledge, gaps in the things they can do. And Scott, I thought I might trigger you a little bit by pulling a little shade on them. So I thank you for responding to that in the way you did. That made me really happy in my heart. But Joy, any thoughts on the challenge that the MSPs face, let alone Scott's point of what the SMB faces from that perspective? What are your thoughts there?
Well, first of all, the imprint of MSPs on the contract supply chain for the Department of Defense is pretty big. It's estimated that about 70% of that supply chain is categorized as a small business. And as we know, most of those small businesses are not going to be able to have in-house talent and skills to implement and sustain management of 110 cybersecurity controls. NIST 800-171, it breaks down to 320 different assessment objectives. If you look at the typical services an MSP would perform on behalf of a small business, they're going to cover anywhere from 35 to 70% of those controls just in their normal service delivery for those small businesses. So the MSP's role is huge. And from the beginning, when I started to teach the CCP classes and I was going around to the MSP
What's CCP stand for? Hold on. We do our acronyms here. What's CCP?
I forgot. Ding me.
I think it's Certified CMMC Professional. I think that's it. So maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
That's one. Okay. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, audience. Okay, good. Sorry about that. It's just a thing we do here.
Well, for the last couple of years, I've been standing up at MSP conferences saying you have to take this seriously. You have to understand how many of these controls you're going to be performing on the customer's behalf. The reason that this collective and our voice is so important is that the DoD's perception of what a managed service provider is and does is vastly different from reality. So they initially were putting.
Do you have any examples of that?
Category. I'm sorry?
Do you have any examples, kind of things where they're just completely wonky in the way they think about what an MSP does?
Well, I'll tell you, the initial documentation provided on the CMMC program put a managed service provider in the same category as a cloud service provider, i.e. Microsoft. And I don't know about you, but those MSPs are not delivering at the scale and even housing.
Well, even very differently. Yeah, what do I do? What do I touch? What wrench do I turn as an MSP? That's completely mixed with what a CSP is, right? A CSP is just a license provider at the end of the day, or a provider of some services or function that are SaaS type functions. And for us MSPs, there's a lot of things we do and tools we use.
According to their own contract terms, if you're using a cloud service provider to store, process, or transmit any of your controlled unclassified information, or CUI, which is what this program is about, that cloud service provider has to be FedRAMP moderate. So how many controls are in FedRAMP moderate? 324, I want to say, not 110. So it's a much higher bar than CMMC itself that they would be applying to a managed service provider. How many managed service providers do you know are FedRAMP moderate? I believe there might be 2 in the United States.
Is Scott one of them?
I could be wrong.
Yeah, I know of one MSSP, and that's Qzara, who is on the collective team. I don't know of any true MSPs that are FedRAMP.
Nor do I.
So there you go. That collapses the entire ecosystem. You have
Yeah.
no qualified providers for an SMB, and yet they make up 70% of the supply chain. That's what the biggest problem is the perception of what we actually do and how we should be assessed, what our standard would be as a service provider versus what the DoD's perception is of, let's just make them FedRAMP, moderate, or
Right.
equivalent as their bar that we would be setting, which is completely unrealistic.
Sure. Agreed.
And for scale's sake, you can actually, I mean, this is all public information. You can look up what FedRAMP moderate is, but if you're a nerd like me and you really want to understand Microsoft Trust Center, they'll give you the FedRAMP moderate audit that they underwent. They update it every year. You can actually see all their controls documentation with some redaction, obviously, but it's like a 480-page document last time I looked at it, of every piece of nitty-gritty bit of their cloud operation, every piece of their network, every piece of their corporate network. They spend millions upon millions of dollars to become FedRAMP moderate. And it doesn't get much cheaper as the business gets smaller. It just gets more difficult to achieve because you don't have the resources.
The separations of duties or the things that you might need to accomplish some of those, for sure. So if I can restate what you said, Joy, the challenge is if this were to go, let's say, unchecked, this first complete broken vision of what an MSP versus CSP is versus what they should have to deal with, right? This broken piece means that if that was to come true, every MSP that serves these SMBs that provides, like you said, something like 40 or 50% at least of the controls that they need day to day, we won't be qualified to do that. Nor will there be enough qualified people for them to do it in-house for the things that they're doing to actually solve that problem, right? To that same exact point. And I think it's that advocacy that you're looking to provide with this coalition. Is that a fair summation, is to be able to bring advocacy to the government, to Congress, to not only, as Scott said, which is actually ask for the money to fix the DIB through grants, through other methodologies to actually help them get to at least a base starting point. Because once you get a program like that started, the net new costs aren't all that hard, right? Is that a fair statement, Scott? Once you go down that deep compliance, I have internal security officer and ISO, I have all those things going. The net cost isn't much worse next, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, once you look at the operational cost to keep it in place, yes, it's more. It is more than what many companies are doing today, but it's not a company killer. To keep in perspective, what the DIB is going through right now is essentially what financial institutions and banks went through in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s with regulation.
Ooh, nice comparison.
If you are, if you're looking at regulated industries, unregulated industries, and unregulated manufacturer, for instance, for example, may spend 0.5% to 1% on IT and compliance of their revenue on a yearly basis. Okay, that's kind of normal, right? Regulated industries spend 6 to 8% of revenue on IT and compliance.
Jason Slagle and I were just talking about this on stage, right? You have that higher spend of that revenue. Nearing 8% is massively different, at least in that start. Sorry, Scott, continue.
Absolutely. It's a huge difference. And so, it is more expensive, but the lift to get from 0 to 100 is very significant, especially for small businesses. And so we want to do this advocacy. And so essentially, the MSP Collective is a 501c6. We are a nonprofit organization. Essentially, it's the same as a chamber of commerce, if you will, a business community. And that's what we've started. And so we're trying to bring together all the MSPs and MSSPs so that we can actually go lobby Congress, go lobby DoD as an organization for the MSP and MSSP industry. And so that's what we're doing, is we're pooling resources among a bunch of smaller MSPs to be able to go and have the weight to be able to go talk to Congress, to be able to go talk to DoD and make our views known. Whereas if we go and then Qzara goes separately and Neosystems goes separately and Pax8 goes separately, we're not going to have near the impact that we can have together. Plus, lobbying is expensive. I don't know if you know that or not, but lobbyists aren't cheap. And so, it's expensive. And so we have to, we're pooling resources essentially to be able to go do that work.
Yeah, that's cool. So Joy, first, you're right. Lobbying is expensive, and we want one unified voice. We want one unified understanding of this so that we can make this translation and get that mass that we want. But Joy, what kind of MSPs do you even want? What kind of partners do you want in this coalition? What does it take to be part of it? Help me understand some of that a little bit.
Well, The best way I can answer that is that if you're taking CMMC seriously, you would want to be a part of this because it's going to grossly impact the amount of resources that you dedicate to CMMC. There are going to be MSPs out there that have 10% of their clients are in the DIB and 90% are other regular industries, right? They're going to have a big decision to make whether that 10% of revenue is going to be worth it for the haul it will take for them to become ready for CMMC. So beyond the FedRAMP conversation that initially was put out there as what would apply to MSPs, we have now seen some leaked documentation. We've heard for a while rumors that MSPs, the bar will be lowered, if you will, likely to CMMC level 2 for the service provider themselves. So
Sure.
even with that, I can tell you as a MSP at Summit 7, I think that Neosystems Qzara would tell you everything you do in service delivery has to be scrutinized. A lot of MSPs have to rip out their security stack. They have to rip out these solutions they're using that are outsourced personnel that may or may not actually have any knowledge of CMMC. The average small business may have a MSP, they may have a cloud service provider, they may have separate from that an MSSP or a vCISO. There's a bunch of different outsourced entities. Anybody that plays a role in providing security capabilities that fall in line with CMMC is going to have to participate in the assessment process, likely have CMMC level 2 themselves, right? So who do we want to be joining us in this collective is anybody that has a vested interest in the success of the program and knows that they're going to have an expenditure of resources in order to be prepared and ready for this. It is not cheap. I think from the beginning, one of the things that we have said all along in real hard data from what we've seen is that this is a $100,000 problem, right? It's the small businesses themselves are looking at a lot of money, a huge investment to make sure that they're going to be ready for that. If you think it's going to be vastly different for the MSPs to get ready, to get all of the right tools, all of the right training, all of the right personnel in place to do this the right way, then you are misguided. So we want to make sure that smallest to the largest of the MSPs, we have a really good representation of our industry, and we want people to have a voice and help us.
When you hit on a really important part for MSPs, right? I ran an MSP, I had my backup tool and it went to cloud A, and I had my PSA stored in cloud B, and I had this stored in cloud C. You suddenly have to look at that entire landscape, all of it, and understand where does sensitive data go. Well, guess what? Users are users, and they're going to forward the wrong email to my PSA, and now I've got CUI in the wrong cloud, right? And now I can't put my backups here. I've got to get them in GovCloud because there's ITAR CUI sitting in there, right? And oh, by the way, the antivirus application uploads all of the endpoint data to the cloud, including file names and paths and directories.
And is it safe? And,
exactly.
All of that.
And all of that is not in GovCloud. So now we have to evaluate our entire operation, understand where the data lives, and does it meet that threshold.
That's really critical. We've really we built, when we built our managed services offering from the ground up starting in 2017, we had to build everything from scratch. I mean, we literally can't leverage any SaaS solution. I mean, all the regular MSP stack that a normal commercial MSP uses, we can't use any of it. And so that's a huge challenge. And so, what we're looking for, back to the question you asked Joy, just to put another bow on it, is we're looking for MSPs that are really dedicated to the DIB, that are really dedicated to critical infrastructure and are willing to make the investment, or willing to make, the push, not dabble. We're not looking for, for companies that are dabbling. We're looking for companies who are all in, because you can't dabble in this market and be successful.
That's a smart comment. That's a brilliant comment, Scott. You got to pull full laugh out of me on that one, because you're right. You don't dabble in CMMC. One does not simply dabble, right, in CMMC. The other piece you brought up, since you kind of triggered it, and maybe we'll end with this piece and this kind of talk, is what about when this expands beyond the DIB, right? What about when this is not just defense industrial base? What does it matter? One of the things I talk about a lot is that we don't suffer well as a country right? As United States citizens, we would stab each other for a chocolate bar 2 days after a hurricane, right? I think the challenge is we have some real issues there. And imagine if our infrastructure was down. Imagine if we didn't have access to power for weeks on end. Imagine if we didn't have access to trucking systems to bring things to the market. Imagine we didn't. So one of the things is, what does critical infrastructure look like if this expands? If we start really trying to go beyond DIB, what is critical infrastructure, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. So critical infrastructure was defined by PPD, or Presidential Policy Directive 21, and it identifies 16 critical infrastructure sectors. And the 16 critical infrastructure sectors include things like the defense industrial base being one, the financial services sector, the energy sector, the pipeline, healthcare, food and agriculture, critical manufacturing, communications, chemicals. These are all critical infrastructure sectors. So basically, anything that would potentially take down society as a whole if it didn't exist, those are critical infrastructure sectors. And that is exactly what our adversaries are looking to take down. We've heard many situations of trial runs where, they're taking down a wastewater facility, or they take down Colonial Pipeline, or what have you. And these are essentially trial runs for what's going to happen when we do get into a hot war with China, and they start pulling all their punches. And now they're trying to take down all of our critical infrastructure and creating essentially chaos within society. And so we have to expand this. And back to the Johnson Controls thing again. Johnson Controls has impacts in every single one of those critical infrastructure sectors. They run the systems that run all those sectors. And so that is a devastating hack. It really is, because the information that they potentially got about all of our critical infrastructure, OT and ICS, industrial control systems, ICS. So, that is what we really have to be planning for. And so it's going to happen. CMMC is really IT related. It's not OT or ICS related. But NIST just released the new draft of, I believe it was 862 R3 for the cybersecurity of operational technology. That just came out yesterday. And so
I think it's 835. Correct me. I'll double check, but I think it's 835. I'll double check. Anyways, continue.
Maybe I thought it was 62. But anyway, regardless, it was released yesterday. And so, that's kind of the next step, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is.
Sorry, I got derailed by the whole, is this the right rev?
For those who want to Google, it's SP 882 revision 3.
82.
You both were on both sides of the,
82.
Of the number.
Yeah,
I want to roll that back
we
for
were
just a
playing
minute.
Overrun, I lost, unfortunately.
I want to roll back for just a minute, because you were hitting on critical infrastructure sectors. And if we just take a quick pause, you said healthcare. That's a big one. Yep. And how many MSPs watch service healthcare in some form or fashion, right? Mm-hmm. We all know HIPAA is useless, and we all know the government is going to come for it. Financial services, right? We see a lot of small credit unions and small banks and other financial type companies and small investment firms and banking firms being serviced by MSPs. So as this lands and expands, which I think we all agree is important, right? Because these are critical things, but we need to do it right. This is going to impact more than just MSPs that service the DIB, right? Yeah. This is not a DIB. Right now, it's a DIB-specific initiative, but that's not the idea behind CMMC.
Well, kind of a broader way
and we have
is the 32 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, is what addresses the controlled unclassified information. So this is the sensitive information that is shared amongst government agencies for a purpose. We learned from 9/11 that the sharing of information is one of the major problems that led to 9/11. And so they want to be able to share this across government agencies. This type of data, last count that I saw, was at least 14 different government agencies leverage a form of CUI and share it with their supply chain. So this is starting with the DoD, and the CMMC is the assessment program that assesses NIST 800-171. NIST 800-171 is the framework that is cultivated to protect the confidentiality of a specific type of information. But that same type of information and the NIST 800-171 requirements go across all those government agencies. CMMC is the first program that is going to force an assessment so that a third party will validate that the controls have been implemented correctly. So if you look at it on the broader scale, we're starting with the DoD and the supply chain of the DoD because critical infrastructure is a lot more involved in that area. But you can look across all the other government agency and see how it's probably going to extend outside of the United States. Canada right now is setting up their own. So an MSP that's thinking, I think we could do this, there's a huge opportunity in addition to the huge challenge that we have.
Yeah.
And I've seen chatter about
lighting
Homeland,
up so much.
Justice, even the Department of Education. I've seen 800-171 related chatter. So it's starting, right? Sorry, what's in the chat?
Well, and what we're really looking at, though, is that the standard's rising, right? For all of us, we're starting to realize there are going to be standards. We're going to be assessed against them. When we start thinking about the critical infrastructure, I go back to a talk that I just gave up in Canada, and I've given quite a bit now, which is comparing the fact that we as humans always take advantage of the positive of something before we ever think about securing and protecting it, right? And that's not just a US trait, that's a human trait. We get air conditioning, we're putting it in the house. It's amazing. We get a car, we're going to drive that son of a gun. We invented the car in 1897 by Benz. This first seatbelt patent wasn't filed until 1950. In fact, some lady in California had to hand paint lines on the road because she was tired of people hitting each other and killing each other, right? And so you get into this world where we as a society do it always delayed. In fact, it seems to be 80 to 100 years. Well, guess what? We've built electronic toasters that'll tell me how toasty my toast is over the internet. We've built all of those features in before ever thinking about the security and implications of it. And when you start thinking about those interdependencies down that supply chain, that's really, really big. And where does criticality stop? At some point, and this is to your point, Scott, Johnson Controls wouldn't have been thought of as a massively critical component, but it is a component in critical infrastructure and part of that aspect of it. And so there is an impact to that. And so I actually happen to think that at some point there will be a universal standard that we must meet and that we have to at least get to some basic hygienic aspects. It's the way the car industry worked. It starts with activism. It starts with what you're doing in that collective right now, right? Ralph Nader wrote Unsafe at Any Speed in 1965. And in 1966, we had the first national motor vehicle safety legislation. Things didn't get fixed overnight. But over the next 30 years, we built in airbags and safety systems. We got it to where cars had to manufacture it with the seatbelt. I couldn't just buy it as an extra option. I started to have crash testing. I started to have safety regulations and things that go into that space. So I think we're all headed that path. And I think if we want to manage this in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't destroy entire portions of our industry and how we support people through regulation, I think it's important for you to tie in with groups like what you, Joy, and you, Scott, are doing with all of your partners out there that you named. I'll mess them up, so I won't name them. But how do they get in touch with you? How do they join this organization? Let's end with that.
Go ahead,
You want to
Joy.
take it, Scott? MSPcollective.org. You can go and see what our positions are. There's a membership tab where you can look at the different types of memberships available. There's some misinformation out there that some MSPs are under the impression that there was a huge price tag to participate in any way. We do have a very high level membership where you would be helping to actually contribute to the lobbying efforts that we are doing. But so take a look at the different types of memberships. We have some low-level memberships where you can still have a voice, influence, stay updated on everything that we're doing. I also want to point out on Monday, Pax8 has invited us to participate in the monthly Microsoft call, and Neo Systems will be on with me on Monday. So we'll have more than one of our founding partners represented and be able to dive a little deeper too.
Very, very cool. Well, if you are buying a GCC high tenant from us at Pax8, which means you're probably likely working with someone in the DIB or in the ITAR space that you're working with, it probably behooves you to get involved with organizations like the collective that is being put together. So if you're buying a GCC high tenant from us, from Dom and I guess collectively is our representation at Pax8, please make sure you're learning the things you have to do so you don't set yourself up for failure, and so you can make these plans and make these lobbying efforts and tell people where you're struggling as a practitioner. Explain where there's a gap in the understanding of what's happening. And especially as these assessments start rolling in, it's going to be very critical for people to have a lobbying arm and a lobbying force to make this work out the way it should work out. So I'll close it out with that by thanking the two of you for coming on and agreeing to be in the hot seat. I'll also thank you for the thousands of comments it looks like we got through this. I'm being a little hyperbolous, but there's a lot of people very interested in this topic, so it seems to be quite timely. So thank you all for taking time out of your day to be here, and we'll close it out.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much,
very much.
Joy, Scott. It was fantastic to have you on the show. Thanks for sharing more about the MSP Collective. That's our show for the week. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. This stuff is really important. If you are at all involved in these spaces, please at least give it a look. And like Joy said, start to make those hard decisions. Understand what's important to your business before you move forward. We'll see you next week for the start of Cybersecurity Month. We're super excited for it. If you're a Pax8er, make sure you catch all of the Cybersecurity Month episodes. It might help you get that belt. And with that, we'll see you next week.